Welcome to the Northern Outer Banks Podcast. From wild horses to small town legends, this is where stories, history, nature, and everyday life come together. Each episode is a front porch conversation with the people and places that give this stretch of North Carolina its soul. Whether you've been coming here for years or just found it on a map, pull up a chair. You're in for a good story. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Northern Outer Banks Podcast. I'm Miles Daniels, and it is a privilege to have with me today as my guest Jill Landen, Curator for Whalehead, as well as Historic Corolla Park. Did I get that right, Jill?
Whalehead in Historic Corolla Park.
In Historic Corolla Park, pretty close. Thank you for being here, and many of you are listening, so we'll try to paint a picture in terms of where we're at. Difficult to do it so beautiful out here today. For those watching, we are on the front lawn of Whalehead, locally known as Whalehead Club to some, but Whalehead officially. One of the most iconic, architecturally interesting buildings on the Northern Outer Banks, and we're lucky to have you here to walk us through the history of this building, some of the fascinating stories, the family who originally built it. So welcome. And just for context, for those who are listening or watching today, give us a little bit of background in terms of where we are, sense of place, sense of time.
We are right near Corolla Village in the northern Currituck Outer Banks, and we are in Historic Corolla Park. And here in the park, we have beautiful parkland. We're right on the Currituck Sound. In the park, we've got Whalehead, which we're sitting in front of. We also have the Wildlife Center, which is an incredible museum that talks about a lot of the wildlife in the area, has a really good film. And our newest facility is the Maritime Museum, which talks about Currituck heritage and how important the boats were to the heritage of Currituck. We also have a playground here in the park. People put their boats in here. We have festivals that are a lot of fun. One of our biggest ones is July 4th. We get people from, the grounds are packed with people.
Prime location for fireworks.
Yes, and
right
it's
here.
A lot of fun. So we do all sorts of things.
And just briefly, playground's a great feature to note, simply because a lot of our guests check in early on a Saturday, Sunday, sometimes Friday. And if they're looking for something to do with the family, children, this is a great spot. The lighthouse, Whalehead, you kind of have it all. Beautiful setting. So let's jump right in. We're here today to talk about Whalehead.
Okay.
And we've had a lot of conversations off camera, but I'd like for you to share some of those with our listeners today in terms of what is the history of the building. How did it end up here on the Northern Outer Banks in the 1920s? Very different place, very different in terms of location, accessibility, etc.
I know, you're right. It's a very different place today than it was in the 1920s. And I guess one of the reasons that it ended up here is because we are on the Atlantic Flyway here, where the waterfowl are going down, to spend the winter in the south. So they're flying down. And we became very well known for incredible waterfowl hunting opportunities here. During the Civil War, this area pretty much got occupied very quickly by the Union soldiers, by the North. And they enjoyed the hunting down here during the war, and after the war was over, they went home, and word spread about how incredible it was. So different groups of very wealthy northeastern industrialists and people like that from New York, Baltimore, Boston, got together and bought up most of the Northern Outer Banks. So it was almost hunt club after hunt club after hunt club. So here on the property was the Lighthouse Club, which was built right at the same time, or right around the time when the Currituck Beach Light was built in the 1870s. And it was just south of us a little bit. And it was a membership club from a group of men from New York and Boston. And that was here from the 1870s until pretty much it went defunct, the membership, by the 20s. The 1920s. You'd had World War I in between there, and the people had passed on. So the property was up for sale, and a Mr. Edward Collins Knight Jr. heard about the sale, and he was just looking for kind of a secluded place, just a nice vacation area for him to just get away from everything, to get away from the other areas where he had homes. He was very wealthy. He had home in Philadelphia, in Newport, Rhode Island, in Middletown, Rhode Island. He had a suite at the Plaza, and they spent a lot of time in Europe. So I think he wanted to get away from that. So he purchased the property, 4.5 miles of land, basically from the Sound to the ocean. A lot of property here. And married his second wife, Marie Louise LaBelle Bonet Knight, and they honeymooned down here in 1922. And they stayed in that old lighthouse club, the club that was just south of us. And it was kind of in bad shape. It had weathered many hurricanes and the winds, the harsh kind of weather we get here on the Outer Banks. But they thought it was fine to stay in while they made plans to build Whalehead. And so it took 3 years. First of all, they did meticulous planning on what they wanted. And then it took 3 years to build the property, the building here. And after that, they burned down the Lighthouse Club because it was in such bad condition. And you did not have big garbage disposal things like that, ways to get rid of your building materials. So to get rid of it, you would burn things down.
Not to mention no highways, bridges,
exactly, because
everything.
there was no road here until 1984. So they had to barge everything down here for the building. So hence, that's how they got rid of things too. Barged them off or burned them down. And so the Knights, like I said, spent 3 years building this and didn't stint on anything. I mean, it's an incredible building. And I think pretty much what it's best known for is it's kind of one of the best examples of Art Nouveau decoration in America, with its architecture and the interior. Art Nouveau never really took off in America. It was much more of a European thing. And by the time they built this in the 1920s, Art Nouveau was out of fashion. But we think that Mrs. Knight, who was French-Canadian, just really liked Art Nouveau. And Art Nouveau just is a French term, hence meaning new art, very simple. And she really liked it. So she had a house in Middletown, Rhode Island, which was torn down, and they built another house called Stony Brook for Mr. Knight and Marie Louise. But she saved the Art Nouveau components from that building and saved them. And then when they were building Whalehead, had them barge down here, because once again, no road. So you'd come by sand or you would come by the Sound, and barged all the components down here for the building. And we have a letter talking about somebody bringing them down from Rhode Island, where they laid out all these Art Nouveau pieces around the building. And he calls it kind of it was like a puzzle, because they brought rooms down in their entirety that they'd taken apart, and they had to put them back together, like our library and our dining room inside. Those were all in another house. A lot of the components you see on the outside came from another house. Even to our planters, up on the building. And so they laid them down, and then they had to reassemble them to fit this building. So I think that must have been really interesting to see how they worked it all out. But so there's a lot of amazing things for this building for the Outer Banks. It's 21,000 square feet. It's a lot bigger than it looks from out here. There are 5 floors. And amazingly, it has a basement. It's kind of unheard of to have a basement on the Outer Banks then, because of the water levels. So what they had to do was they dredged out our boat basin and 2 canals and pushed all of that soil from that dredging up onto the first floor they had built, which turned into the basement. And so you can't see our basement from out here, but with all that dredging, when this was originally built, it was sort of on a hill. It's settled a lot now. But you can get you can hide a lot of labor and work in a basement, and that's what they were used to. Like the servants were down there in the root cellar doing laundry, things like that. So the Knights and their guests wouldn't have seen that because it was in the basement, plus you could store stuff. So also, because they dredged that boat basin out and the 2 canals, we're kind of like on an island here. So Mr. Knight decided, since this wasn't going to be a club, he did not want this to be a club at all. He wanted just a private home for he and his wife and his friends and family to come to. he changed the name from Lighthouse Club to Corolla Island, because this region had different names, but at that it was called Corolla. That was the Corolla Village, was right here. And so he called it Corolla Island because it was an island. And there were 2 bridges that you had to drive over, or there were 2 different bridges. And to get here, because we're on an island, basically. And along with Whalehead, he had this architectural vision. He was an artist and really into architecture. So he made a plan to build Whalehead and then to build a boathouse along with it and a caretaker's house that all went together. And today, the Whalehead and the boathouse and one of the bridges, which is left, are all on the National Register of Historic Places. So we're very proud of that.
I can only imagine during the 1920s, just the architecture alone, Art Nouveau. I mean, that was not something you would see here on the Outer Banks.
Not at all.
Strangers moving into this established community, much like 20 years before that the Wright brothers did, just south of us in Kitty Hawk.
Right.
What was the reaction of the local community seeing this new family arrive, this beautiful, what many locals call Corolla's Castle? And if you've ever seen it in person, and if you haven't, please do. It's absolutely amazing place to visit, much like the Biltmore is in the western part of North Carolina.
In fact, people call this the Little Biltmore, or
the Little Biltmore
on the coast,
or the Biltmore on the coast. I have heard that, but very similar in terms of. In many ways, it feels a little bit out of place, but so much now a part, an integral part of our history, and now the fabric of the Northern Outer Banks. Arriving here in the 1920s, what was the community like? What was the Northern Outer Banks like, this small town of Corolla at the time? I don't even know if it was called Corolla at that point, maybe.
Well, yes, by then it was called Corolla. The area could be called Whalehead or Jones Hill, because there was a big sand dune here, but the village was Corolla. The area had hunt club after hunt club, interspersed with very small little villages. But Corolla became one of the largest over here because, on the Northern Outer Banks, because they had the lighthouse, and then they had a life-saving station, and that was government money. So it brought in federal money and brought people in to work with the lighthouse and the life-saving station, and hence a larger village was kind of built. There was a church, a school, things like that. So it was a very remote area. People would go on the sound in their boats to get here, or go on the sand, because there was no public road until 1984. So it was still remote, but there was a village here, and they had access to communication with the outside world. When Mr. Knight was here, he had to keep up his investments, and so to communicate, there was no phone here, but he used the telegraph at the life-saving station. So they had a reciprocal stuff going on.
And Mrs. Knight was quite an eccentric character in her own right, and avid duck hunter, etc.
I think the villagers sometimes didn't know what to think of her, because she liked to hunt, but she also loved to ride horses. She would dress for dinner, but most of the time she was just on her horse riding around the property wearing riding pants, where Mr. Knight was a little eccentric too, in that he was such a fancy dresser. He went everywhere with his British valet who helped him dress. So that was kind of interesting.
He had the larger of the 2 closets, separate bedrooms, right? But he had the larger, probably because of that.
Yeah, she didn't have a big closet just underneath the dormer windows. So I think it was a lot to take in. Plus, the Knights had 2 Delco generators in the boathouse, and lines tunneled under the sand into the basement here at Whalehead. So you've got this bright yellow building, 5 floors. And can you imagine? They didn't have electricity here for years after that in this area. What the villagers thought, this bright yellow building all lit up. It must have just been amazing. And like wondering, they were probably confused. Why did they build here? What is this? But the Knights had a pretty good relationship with the villagers, I think. There was definitely some differences, but they made sure that when any of the children were born, they would give them christening gifts, like silver porringers or things like that with their names and the dates of their birth on there. They made sure they gave money to the Baptist church that was in the town then for Christmas.
Is that the same church that still exists in the building?
You know what?
Village, rather?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I don't know if that is the original Baptist church. I think it is, but it's been moved. The one that's there now has been moved. It's moved in the village, like across the street.
Okay.
But like for Christmas, the Knights made sure that everybody in the village got a Christmas present. So, and I've been told a lot of what we know is through oral history, stories being passed on. And I've been told that at one point, because the Knights were here during the Depression too, to fund people, to give them money, Mrs. Knight would not like where a pile of rocks or bricks were. And so she would hire somebody to move that pile of rocks to another spot. And then she wouldn't like that, so she'd pay them to move them back to the original spot. That's pure oral history. I can't prove that, but It's a pretty good story. So I guess she was, paying people to do things like that. Plus they hired a lot of the hunting guides that were local. A lot of their servants were local. So there was a good relationship. However, they did travel pretty much everywhere they went with 12 to 14 servants that came with them that were mostly European immigrants, kind of like people in service. If you think of the show Upstairs, Downstairs or Downton Abbey, it was kind of like that. They came over from Europe and worked for the Knights. Like Mr. Knight's butler, his the man who helped dress him, his valet, was British. Mr. Starkey's wife came and daughter, and they all have a bedroom on the third floor. The cook here, Miss Rose, was Portuguese, and she actually lived right down the street from the Knight's house in Middletown, Rhode Island. She had a dairy farm and a number of children, and then her husband died in the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. Until just recently, nobody really understood what that meant, a flu epidemic, but we do now, so after COVID. But after her husband died, the Knights paid off Mrs. Rose's mortgage on the dairy farm. And so she worked with them, and they had a pretty close relationship. Mr. Knight taught the young girls, her daughters, how to read, and the daughters came down here with them. So they had an interesting relationship with both the Corolla villagers and their servants. And some of the servants that they ended up going up to Rhode Island with them and traveling places came from down here.
Wow.
Yeah, Kitty Hawk and Corolla.
Just hearing you describe it, I think, so many comparisons. We've talked about Biltmore during the era of the Great Gatsby.
Right.
The Downton Abbey of the Outer Banks, maybe even,
Well, yeah, in a way.
And some of the ways that you described upstairs, down, exactly, closest to it. So let's take, it's open to the public.
Yes.
Folks who visit the Northern Outer Banks can come and visit the home and take a tour. Take us inside. You have been connected to this home and
I
been
love
in
it. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of your favorite features?
Okay.
What are some of the things that guests who visit should not miss?
Okay, well, first of all, if I were coming here for the first time, I would just walk around the park first to understand the setting that this building was put in, because they chose how they built this and where they put it because of this beautiful natural setting. They love nature. And the bright colors reflect nature. It's very Art Nouveau, that new art. One of my favorite things when you go inside, when you make it to the kitchen, you're going to be really surprised at the color of that. It's bright candy pink. It's just so bright. And it's tiled in that bright candy pink. And it's because we think Miss Rose, the Portuguese cook, loved that color pink and rose. And they say there's still a potting kitchen in Stony Brook, which was the Knight's home up in Middletown, Rhode Island, which is right near Miss Rose's home. Sure. The potting kitchen still has that same pink tile in it. I've never been in there, so I don't know, but that's what I've been told. So evidently she liked it so much they had it in both residences. I wouldn't miss the basement. A lot of people, if they don't have enough time, they think, well, we just won't go to the basement. I would go to the basement because that is where we have a self-guided an exhibit that tells all the rest of the history of the building, because so much more, and the site, so much more happened here than just when the Knights were here in the 1920s and 30s. And that, don't miss, because you can learn a lot of stuff that you'd be very surprised about.
So Jill, in addition to the pink kitchen, there are so many interesting, fascinating features within the home itself. The Tiffany glassware, the shape of the door handles.
Right.
One of my favorites, the commissioned Steinway piano. What should guests see, experience, not miss, and what are some of your favorites having?
Let's see, well, when you first walk in, you're going to notice the cork floors, and they have been replaced, but they had cork floors just like that, which are soft underfoot and really easy to take care of. We're becoming popular in the 20s. You'll see the wonderful colors of the paints throughout the house, which are all original. They've tested it, and these are the colors, the bright colors that imitate nature, with the greens, like the green copper roof, or it's going to turn green. The original turned green. And you can see on the doorknobs, things like that, they all look like duck heads, or most of them look like duck heads. And the dining room, we call it the water lily room because it's very Art Nouveau, but throughout the room, they're like water lilies on the furniture, on the walls, and then our incredible, one-of-a-kind, basically priceless Tiffany water lily globes, which are signed and numbered by Tiffany. And you'll see Tiffany was throughout this house, even in for lighting, even in the servants' areas, which is really surprising. So they had the first elevator on the Outer Banks here. That's interesting to look for. They had special ways of cooling the house. So you can see as you walk through it, you'd see windows in odd places, like on bathrooms or in hallways. And it was to get the air flowing into the hallways, up the steps, and finally up to our middle chimney, because we have 5 chimneys, up through the middle chimney, which is a false chimney, and it worked kind of like as a vacuum effect. The hot air would go out the chimney. And they say it worked to help cool off the house during the summers. So that's kind of amazing. Recessed radiators where you can't see them, they're little holes for the heating and air conditioning. Just the fact that there was electricity. There were 3 Frigidaire refrigerators. I mean, they didn't stint on anything in this house. It's pretty amazing.
Tell us a little bit more. I know we had talked off camera about logbooks and the guests who would visit. This was quite, you think back, we now have thousands of vacation homes here on the Northern Outer Banks, but at the time, there weren't many vacation homes. That in essence is what this became for the Knight family, for friends and family. So
yes.
I'd love for you to talk about how did they get here, how long did they stay, what was the reason for visiting?
Okay.
Probably less so the beach at the time and more so the duck hunting opportunity, right?
The hunting season was not in the summer. They did have an outdoor pool, so people did come down in the summer sometimes, but they were mostly here through the hunting season, which was the fall and winter. And their friends and family, some would come down. They inherited a logbook from the Lighthouse Club, which had been started in the 1870s, which listed what members were down, what the weather was like, what birds had been shot, and incidentals, like if there was a shipwreck, like when the Metropolis, a famous shipwreck, went down, picking up bodies off the beach, even if there was a wedding from the servants, just all sorts of very interesting things. So the Knights took over that logbook and then had another one too through the years, where they kind of copied that and continued it. They listed what family members, what guests were here. Sometimes people would drop in just for lunch from some of the other hunt clubs. And from 1922, which is that when they first bought the property and stayed in the Lighthouse Club until 1934, only 200 guests actually came here. So it wasn't like huge Great Gatsby parties. It was just more of an intimate entertainment area. And they were here to get away, their friends were, and many of them to hunt. And they actually, some of the Mr. Knight's friends were members of this Epicurean club called the Rabbit Club, which is in Philadelphia, and they would take turns cooking here. So they were very into gourmet food down here that they would eat with the duck and everything. So it's kind of interesting, I think.
One of my favorite times of year, and for those who are visiting the Northern Outer Banks during the holiday season, and many locals love this as well, the candlelight Christmas tours.
Oh, I love those. And I just want to throw this out. We have our Mrs. Knight's iconic Steinway, which we love. It's basically was made custom for her, Art Nouveau. We play that Steinway. It gets played at Christmas at our tours, and you have played it for us, so we appreciate you playing it.
The depth and warmth for anyone who plays piano, and to sit down. They say if these walls could talk, if that piano could talk. Every time I sit down, I think I wonder who, over the course of 100 years now, has played that piano.
And what stories it could tell.
It's amazing the condition that it's in.
Oh, I know.
Unique. It was, as you mentioned, commissioned for the family, but
Steinway made it for them in 1903. It goes back to that, and they moved it down here. But so you can hear that played at Christmas. We also have decorated from those logbooks we talked about. Mr. Knight was an artist also. So in the logbooks at Thanksgiving and Christmas, he would paint like a little picture of a Christmas tree or the sunset, things like that for the holidays. And we've used those paintings, those little pictures he painted, as our inspiration for how we decorate at Christmas time. So it's straight from those logbooks what we do. Our wreaths are they use natural things that they could get here. Our wreaths are like that. The Christmas trees are from pictures of what he drew in the logbooks. Like in our office, we have a Christmas tree that we usually have birds on it. It's because that comes from a picture that he did. And when people come for these candlelight tours, we really want them to feel like they've gone back to the 1920s. So the Christmas trees are, because they had electricity, the Christmas trees actually have electric lights, because it was the 20s. That was the first time that the electric lights on the Christmas trees really became practical. And so we use these things called C6 lights, and they're colored. They're not like the white lights, that a lot of people use today. They are big colored lights, and tinsel was popular in the 20s too. So we have tinsel on some of our trees. So you can really get a feeling of the 1920s. And we have, at the end, we have refreshments. And so we have cookies that were made from recipes that were from the 20s. So we really try and go straight back to that.
It's a wonderful experience. And I just, in hearing you talk about the holiday season and then just the guest who visited, I mean, this was the party you wanted to be invited to in terms of the live music, the Steinway piano. I'm sure maybe even some craft cocktails that were popular during the Prohibition.
It was Prohibition, but they certainly had a wine cellar here. And not only was it the Knights and their guests, and we talk about this in the tour, on the candlelight tours too, there's 12 to 14 servants that traveled with them from Europe. They all had their own Christmas traditions also. So this would have been, I almost think the more fun place to be here at Christmas, or just as fun, would be in the servants area of the building. There were maids from France. The cook was from Portugal. The British valet. So that would be very interesting too.
As we're wrapping up here, and we could sit here for hours.
Yes.
Not just because it's so beautiful in terms of location, but the stories. What's your favorite story or feature of Whalehead?
Well,
Jill?
that's why if you come, make sure you see the basement, because it tells all the rest of the history of the building. And people would be very surprised to know about the importance of World War II right here on the property. There were all sorts of German submarines during World War II right off the coast here, especially at the beginning of the war. And they were shooting down our ships. I mean, they say if you went out at night, the whole sky would be ablaze, which is hard to believe now. But once they learned how to do convoys to protect our shipping, that didn't happen so much. But that was at the beginning of the war. So we tell a lot of stories about that, and about the mounted horse patrol. There were 400 Coast Guard men here on the property. The Coast Guard leased the property during the war because it was so important and so close to Norfolk. So that was very interesting. And then later in the 60s, another military-ish kind of thing, the Atlantic Research Corporation purchased the building to do rocket fuel testing. Wow. And it's kind of amazing. It was top secret. They picked the property because they could control who came on the property. There was no road here until after that. The winds were perfect, just like the Wright brothers picked the area for flying. And what they were doing was static rocket fuel testing, it was very toxic, the things they were doing. But the efforts that they did down here with their scientific research ultimately got us to the moon. And people don't realize all this stuff happened here on this property and in Currituck. And that's what's amazing to me. There's so much history happened here that people don't even have an idea about. But we talk about it in the basement. So,
very quickly, how does one visit? Where does one purchase tickets? Are there tickets to purchase?
Yes.
So for those who are listening who want to visit this iconic landmark here on the Northern Outer Banks.
Yes, we do charge admission. It's just a nominal fee. It's the fee is based on age. All you have to do is come to the other side of the building, go into our ticket office, and you'll purchase a ticket. And it's a self-guided tour. We have guides set around the building. Stand around the building to answer questions. But basically, you're going to hear a tour 45 minutes to an hour on our iPads. And that means you don't have to wait as long, and we can get a lot more people through. So you don't have to make reservations.
Jill Landen, this has been a treat. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with our listeners the history, the fascinating stories that you've learned during your time here at Whalehead. And we hope they'll come and visit during their next trip to the Northern Outer Banks.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
I'm Miles Daniels, and thank you for joining us for the Northern Outer Banks podcast. We look forward to having you with us next time.
Here, wild horses roam windswept beaches, and the ocean stretches endlessly before you. Each sunrise brings a new adventure. Each breeze carries the salt and serenity of the sea. Climb our historic red brick lighthouse. Savor fresh seafood and North Carolina barbecue. This is more than a vacation. It's a place that renews your spirit and keeps calling you back. Where in the Outer Banks? Only in the Northern Outer Banks.